I don't know if I was necessarily like team Jacob, but I was definitely team Taylor Lautner. Where would the house be for eternity? Because you do location, location, location. Well, hello, I'm Erica. I am Odd. It's time for another monthly reading wrap up. This marks officially being halfway through the year of reading. So I guess everything I read in July can be considered either the true halfway point or just over the halfway point. So without further ado, let's get into it. I read exactly 7 books in July, which is good because my reading goal for this year was in fact 52 books and I am at 46 books. So I think that we're moving at a great pace, and once I hit 52, I'm just gonna kind of keep going to see how many books I can read in a year. So I actually kicked off this month by picking up the Twilight series again. I started it like at the end of June, obviously, because the Twilight series is one that I never read when I was younger, when the books were coming out, because I really wasn't a reader in school, as we know. However, I always loved the movies. When the movies came out when I was a kid, it was such a big deal. I was such a Twilight fan. I remember once a family friend had won tickets to the midnight premiere of Eclipse, and I lost my mind. I took my friend, we went, we were absolutely losing it. We were so excited. Like it was truly like one of those things where you're like, how did this even happen? Now, when we see the premiere of something in the theater nowadays, like there's still pandemonium at times for it, but back when these movies and like the Harry Potter movies and the Hunger Games movies were all coming out, it was a huge deal. And I can't remember really the last time, maybe that's because I'm an adult now. Movie premieres are not the top priority for me anymore, but I remember just back then it was so crazy. The fact that we even got tickets to the premiere, it was incredible. But those movies still mean so much to me. I still watch them regularly. And I was like, okay, as an adult, I want to read the Twilight series. I read the first book, I want to say like a year and a half ago, and it took me forever to get into it because I was like, what the like, I was always told these books were so good, and this is just not like living up to this hype that everybody has said, and it's sort of like reads like very juvenile, and like it's just not what I thought it was going to be. And so once I changed my mindset to these books are supposed to be just fun, they're not supposed to be the greatest pieces of literature ever written, just have fun, I immediately got back into it. So I knew that I was going to read the Twilight series this year. I just didn't know when. I was gonna save it for like September, but I have so many books on my list. I was like, you wanna know what, for my birthday, I'm gonna start reading the Twilight series again and slowly make my way through it. So we're gonna talk about both of those books right now, which are New Moon and Eclipse. I ended up finishing those back to back. So I was eating them up, and I still am. I have Breaking Dawn. I'm currently listening to the audiobook and reading it on Kindle. Let's start with New Moon, right? Because when I was younger, I don't know if I was necessarily like team Jacob, but I was definitely team Taylor Lautner. So take with that what you will. So essentially in New Moon, I'm gonna spoil these if you haven't seen one of the most iconic movies in the world or read these books. Sorry. So essentially in New Moon, we see that Edward has left Bella for what he thinks is for her safety. And this entire book is essentially following Bella move through that depression of who she feels is her soulmate leaving her, trying to function in life without Edward and without the Cullens. And it's then that we see her more interacting with her best friend, Jacob Black, who lives on the reservation nearby. They've known each other since they were kids. All of a sudden, Jacob starts acting strangely, and he's not returning her calls, and he cuts his hair and gets a tattoo, just behaving extremely off. Then it's revealed, oh my god, there's werewolves. Like when I saw the movies, I loved that edition. I was like, of course there's werewolves. I love this. And I liked in the book too how they described it was like she found giant wolves when Laurent found her, and how the pack sort of works, and how Jacob suddenly has this loyalty to these guys that he's never like actually hung out with or had a friendship with, but is now like obsessed with being a part of their group. And the thing about this book too is I like how it showed her sort of depression of the breakup, of when who you think is your person leaves you. Who is it? I think it's Taylor Swift that said time moves slower for the brokenhearted. And this book really encapsulated that, of like, she is heartbroken throughout this entire book, but having Jacob there, leaning on him and leaning on his friendship, and starting to begin to have sort of these romantic feelings, that it doesn't take away everything that she felt for Edward, but it does sort of band-aid it. Was she a bit dramatic in this book with this breakup? Yeah, but we have to remember that she's also like a 17-year-old girl. Very, very dramatic. I was so heartbroken when my college boyfriend and I broke up because he did in fact cheat on me. You guessed it. And it just really encapsulated that feeling of like just post-breakup depression of like you don't want to go anywhere, you don't want to do anything, you don't want to see anybody. And it has like the months past of like October, November, December. She's just in this like heavily depressive state. Did it go on a bit too long? Yeah, I'd say so. But again, I've never fallen in love with a supernatural creature, so who knows? This entire book is essentially her and Jacob building their friendship and sort of a relationship. And we also learn more about like the vampire lore of the Volturi, and we learn about sort of how werewolves come to be. And it was a really nice deep dive into the mythological aspect and not just the love aspect of Twilight. And then the next book we have is Twilight Eclipse. I read one right after the other, and we're dealing with essentially a vampire army in this book because Victoria wants to exact her revenge on the Collins and Bella for destroying her mate James. And I will say I really liked James in the book. I get that he's like the villain, but I really enjoyed his character in the book. I was like, you're so sly and like a little bit of an but you're witty and I like you. So then in Eclipse, obviously the gang's all back together, and it was sort of interesting to see the dynamic of Bella being in love with both Edward and Jacob, but sort of trying to lie to herself that she's not in love with Jacob. She's sort of like bonded to Jacob in that way, and she's trying to just convince herself it's because they're best friends, when in reality she's truly did fall in love with him when she thought that her soulmate was not coming back to her. We also see the obvious negotiations of her trying to be changed into a vampire and Edward being like, yo, I'll do it if you'll legally become my wife, which for her for some reason is like way more of a commitment than becoming a vampire and spending the rest of eternity together, which like as somebody with slight commitment issues, valid. I would feel the same way too, I think, if I was presented with the opportunity to be like, well, you can become a vampire and be with me forever and ever and never pass away, and it's just us for all eternity, or we can get married. I'm like, oh, you know what? You know what? Where would the house be for eternity? Because you do location. You have to think of real estate as eternities go on. Anything to avoid the marriage question. I always tell people, I'm like, I want to get married, but it has to be under the right circumstances. Very much related to Bella in that way of like, we have to. Can't we just be together forever and love each other? And he's like, no, I want to marry you. Girl, I grew up around the Spanish flu. You got married or you got excommunicated. Like, you have to marry me. And you can definitely tell at that point when they're talking about like her virtue and getting married and doing things in the proper steps, you can tell Stephanie's Mormon. I will say I liked the Eclipse book so far the best. I'm like 20 or 30% into Breaking Dawn. They're on their honeymoon, so whatever percentage that is, it could be 12%. I have no idea. I'm just listening and having a great time. I can already kind of tell Eclipse, I think, is my favorite book, and I might be biased because I go back and forth between Eclipse and New Moon being my favorite movies of the series. So far, the Eclipse book is my favorite. You can tell that she really found her voice. It's just less juvenilely written, and maybe that was on purpose because Bella is also growing up. I really enjoyed Eclipse. I felt that she really found her footing in the series and her voice within being a writer. Also, for those books, I don't think I gave the ratings, but I gave Eclipse 5 stars and I gave New Moon 4 stars, and I'll be taking no notes on that. So for the next book, we have Frida McFadden, shocker, which is, it's a long one, The Widow's Husband's Secret Lie by Frida McFadden, and it's a novella. It was like an hour and a half long for the audiobook or something. It's only like a few hundred pages long, and it's a satirical mystery thriller novel where she essentially is making fun of herself and writers like her the entire time, and it was a great time. If you have ever seen the show The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window, and it makes fun of sort of those types of movies and those types of thrillers, it reminded me very much of that. And it's just, if you're somebody who loves thrillers like I am, it's always nice to see it sort of get made fun of. I don't know why. Some people might be offended by it. I really don't care. I have a great time whenever I see that. I'm like, yeah, valid, because sometimes the twists are ridiculous, and it really does like make fun of sort of this way of writing that if you don't do it correctly, it's a bit ridiculous. You have to have proper plot twists, and it all does have to make sense, or else it's just not gonna work. And so it was just a short little novella about a woman whose husband has passed away, but she's suddenly seeing him everywhere that she goes. And then suddenly there's this other woman with like 11 kids, and it's very like ridiculous in that way. It does the thing that makes a thriller bad, which is having too many plot twists to the point where the story doesn't make sense. Because it's Frida, it's done in such a good way too, to where I'm like, Okay, Frida, I didn't know that you had like satire skills like that. I love. It was a fun, short little read, so if you're looking for like spooky novellas as we move into spooky season here, highly recommend. It's a fun time. It's not super scary too, so if you're somebody who's like, I really don't do thrillers, you're gonna laugh at this. And I gave that 4 stars, and I had a good time, and I would recommend it. Okay, so then the next book we have is Ward D by Frida McFadden. I read 2 Fridas back to back. I gave it 5 stars. So we essentially are following a medical student named Amy Brenner. As she's working through getting her medical degree, she has to go to a bunch of different clinicals with a bunch of different doctors. It's sort of how it works when you're figuring out which field you'd like to go into and where you're going to be placed. Frida being a brain surgeon, I really enjoyed the fact that she did that because I think she has a really obviously good understanding of what that whole process is. So it felt very accurate as we were hearing Amy talk about the process. However, Amy does have to go to a psych ward, which is hard for her because of her past traumas in high school of dealing with her best friend who did in fact lose her mind. And that is sort of the premise of this story, is Amy has to go to the psych ward and spend the night, and that best friend who went crazy in high school is in that psych ward at that time, and she's sort of having to confront her past and her own mental health struggles. You kind of time jump back and forth to being in the ward to being back in high school where Amy was dealing with her best friend. I've dealt with the same guilt that Amy has of like, God, you just can't save somebody that doesn't want to save themselves and make better decisions. And so you just got to separate. And how it talked about mental health and how it talked about mental health and how it talked about like the system, along with the actual like factors of being a thriller, a survive the night style thriller. It dealt with all of the subject matter in a very tactful way. And I really enjoyed that about the book. And I give it 5 stars for that reason. It was all very well put together. No real loose strings, but you still felt in the moment and had these like suspenseful moments of, are they going to make it out, while dealing with a very complex past. So it was a 5-star read for me. The next one I read is Grady Hendrix, How to Sell a Haunted House. As we know, I'm a big Grady fan. I love his work. In this book, he really deals with the subject matter of grief. We deal with 2 siblings, Louise and Mark, and they essentially are estranged siblings because Louise was always the overachiever, hyper independent older sister, if you will, and Mark was sort of the slacker, lazy, screw up brother who has no direction. And so these sort of polar opposite siblings, and definitely parents who enabled Mark and enabled the dynamic within the family. They have come to find out that their parents have passed tragically at the same time. And it's basically dealing with the 2 siblings trying to deal with the logistics and the financial logistics of selling a house when suddenly their mother's puppet collection, because she was a puppeteer, tell me that's not horrifying. All of the puppets sort of start to end up in places that they weren't before. And TVs sort of turn on by themselves. Taxidermy squirrels jump off the shelf. And that's all I'll say about it, because I don't want to spoil anything. But it's very much like a classic haunted house tale where these parents pass away and these 2 siblings are left with this household that all of these strange happenings are going on in, but they also are hoping to sell within a month. Also while dealing with all of this grief. So throughout the book, it goes through the 5 stages of, what is it, like sadness, anger. Yeah, it was like depression, anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance. And as we move through the book, we deal with the 5 stages of grief. It was really good. If you are afraid of like puppets or mannequins, taxidermy, or haunted houses, you might not like this book. It's a horror book. It's not a thriller really. It is a horror book because that's what Grady does. I did give it 4 stars just because it kind of dragged a little bit. The narrative kind of dragged ever so slightly. I think that we could have spent like 1 week less at the house, if I'm being honest, and still had the same plot line and the same plot twist and outcome. That's neither here nor there. I still had a great time. I would still recommend it to you, so I gave it 4 stars. The next one I read is It's Different This Time by Joss Richard, and I gave this book 3 stars. I will explain. I decided to get into my fall reading because here's the thing, August to October, I feel like it's not enough for fall reading. But this book is about June and Adam, 2 estranged former roommates who are called back to their old apartment in New York City due to the passing of their landlord, who has now left them the brownstone apartment that he lived in. And we mostly follow June for the entire book, and we do get his perspective on things, but Adam always stayed in New York. His life was always in New York. We follow June as she makes the struggle to decide if she's going to stay in New York and go into musical theater for her career, on Broadway or return back to LA and attempt to keep trying to make it as an actress. And throughout the book, we learned what made June leave Broadway in the first place and leave the apartment with Adam in such an abrupt way. They're trying to figure out again if they're going to sell this brownstone or stay in it. And it is definitely a second chance romance book. And it does take place in the fall of New York, which I love as a setting now. That's kind of like all the nice stuff I have to say about this book. Here's the thing, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either, which is why I gave it 3 stars. Is this the like most groundbreaking rom-com I've ever read and I like got in my feels about it and cried? No. However, was it horrible or poorly written or did the ending not make sense? No. So it got a 3 stars because I would tell somebody if they asked me, hey, would you recommend this book? I'd go, hey, if you got some time, sure. If you need to like get some fall reading in and you want to just have that New York in fall vibe to a book, I would definitely recommend it for that reason. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily as a rom-com. I think there's significantly better rom-coms that you could read. 3 stars. Do with that what you will. And then the last book I read is Ghosted by Amy Hutton, and I think that's how you pronounce her last name. And we follow Holly and Callum. Holly is someone who communes with spirits, sort of like Sixth Sense style, and she makes her living sort of going to homes that are haunted and banishes the spirits. And Callum is a supernatural podcaster slash trying to make it sort of as a Ghost Adventure style filming person. And Holly and Callum definitely have this past history of being romantic partners. However, Callum calls on Holly in order to investigate a local mansion that like nobody has been able to get their hands on. And it would be the breakthrough for his YouTube channel and possibly like getting a television show maybe. And so he calls on Holly to say, hey, I need you and your abilities to tell me exactly what is going on in this house. So Holly's dealing with these spirits that she is unfamiliar with and don't seem to be tied to anything other than her. They're also communicating in a different way. So apparently in the book, all she hears is like this wailing before these ghosts are banished to wherever she doesn't know, but she does know how to banish them. And suddenly these ghosts are attempting to speak and communicate and talk with her, and she's learning more about her powers and where she comes from and within her family lineage, as well as Callum discovering the mysteries of this mansion. Meanwhile, they are looking to rekindle what they once had between each other and sort of communicating about what went wrong in the past. So again, very much a second chance romance. I gave it 4 stars. I think it was absolutely adorable. I had a great time reading it. I like the concept. It was something that was interesting and kind of newer, and I hadn't really read a book that was based around, I'm sure there's others, but I've never read a book before that's based around a psychic medium and a ghost hunting counterpart and their love story. So I really enjoyed that aspect. And overall, I thought it was really adorable, and it didn't rely too much on the fact that it was a rom-com. It really did have a nice plot twist and storyline and true like plot of this mansion and plot of their purpose there. I really enjoyed that. The plot twist was a bit predictable, but nonetheless, it was still a fun time. It was still enough of a plot twist to be like, yeah, I'm definitely like, I'm down for this. This is good. Be like, yeah, I kind of knew it, but also like, what a fun time. I really liked them together. I think that they did a good job at not making either of their jobs sort of one-dimensional. They had a lot of like factors to her being a psychic medium that felt very realistic, as well as him being somebody who's a true believer in ghost hunter and not somebody that's just out to like make a quick buck. And so they really kept the authenticity of all of that. And so for that, I really enjoyed it. But it is a good time if you're looking for something more paranormal and comedy based. But that is it for today's video. Those are all 7 books I read in July. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you guys have started your fall reading. What is on your list? Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.